Hello, friends, and welcome to another episode of Chapters here on Armstrong Television. And today I am delighted to be chatting with Wesley Browne about his debut novel, Hillbilly Hustle, which was published by WVU Press in 2020. Wesley is the founder and host of Pages and Pints Reading Series at Apollo Pizza in Richmond, Kentucky. He lives with his wife and two sons in Madison County, Kentucky, where he practices law, co-owns and helps manage local restaurants and a music venue, and he coaches sports. Welcome to Chapters, Wesley.
Thank you, Carter.
I love the idea of having a reading series at a pizza shop. That's terrific.
Thank you. It's fun. It's helped us attract people who maybe wouldn't show up otherwise because they get a kick out of the idea that we're going to have pizza and beer and wine and all that stuff.
How long have you had that series going?
We took over Apollo in 2012, but
Wow.
we didn't do it immediately. So in Richmond, we have a place called the Richmond Area Arts Council, and my wife used to be their chair of their board. And at one time, it got talked about that there weren't really any literary events out in the community. We have Eastern Kentucky University, so their authors came to campus, but the community didn't really go to campus for a lot of those. So we launched it there as a way to have a more of a community reading series. And what happened was over time, once we got Apollo, I think it started before we had Apollo even. And then we would go after the readings. The highlight was we would go to Apollo and drink a few beers and have some pizza and a glass of wine. And it occurred to me at some point, because it was hard because the Arts Council was open during the day and these were night events at night, and I'd have to get a key and I'd have to get the code, and the code would change and it would be all this stuff. And we just eventually said, why don't we just start at Apollo? I've got the key to that place. I can do whatever I want. So we basically moved the old Richmond Area Arts Council event to Apollo, and we christened it Pages and Pints. And the very first one, it was going to be Silas House and Jason Howard.
Oh, wow.
We're going to come. They're friends of ours, and Silas said, hey, let us kick this off for you. And I don't think we were very far out. We were close to the date, and they said, is it okay if Morris Manning comes? He'd like to come too. He's a friend, and I know Morris too. And of course, he's a Pulitzer Prize finalist.
Yeah.
You don't say no. So that was our first one. And of course, that's a pretty stacked lineup, and it was really crowded. We had that room holds 50, 60 people, and we were right at capacity for that. And that really was a big start. And it went well ever since. We haven't maintained those huge crowds all the time, but actually I'm getting ready. Silas is coming back tomorrow night.
Oh, fantastic. That's great.
He's coming with his new one, Lark Ascending. Yep. And Erin Keene from Louisville is going to be there as well with her book, Runaway. She's the editor-in-chief of salon.com, but she lives in Louisville. So this must be probably maybe Silas's fourth or so time appearing at Pages of Pints. Yeah, he's been a really big supporter and good proponent of what we do.
Well, let's talk about you a minute. Congratulations on Hillbilly Hustle. I bet that was a real thrill when you found out that WVU was going to publish it, and even better when you actually had one in your hands. Tell me what your reaction was.
Oh, I was tickled. I'm 48 right now. I finished my first novel manuscript when I was 24 years old. I was in law school at the time, and I started sending it out to agents, and I didn't get an agent. And I wound up writing 3 books, completing them before this one. And I started Hillbilly Hustle, I think in 2014 at the Appalachian Writers Workshop. I was in a class with Amy Green, and it was developing ideas for a novel. And I had 3 unpublished manuscripts in my back pocket. And I thought, well, what's one more? So I started working on the idea for this there. And she focused on who is your protagonist. And I sketched out the character who wound up being Knox Thompson,
Mhm.
in her class at the Appalachian Writers Workshop in Heinemann.
Mhm.
And oh gosh, was it 2018 or 19? I can't remember. I tried again. I tried to get an agent really hard, because I thought that was just the way you had to do it. And then finally I thought, I'm just going to try and approach publishers myself. And you can't approach every publisher yourself. And David Joy is a friend, and he helped me a little bit and gave me some advice, and he told me some people to approach. But there were a lot of authors that I admired who had published with West Virginia University Press. Glenn Taylor had
Yeah.
been is a friend and someone that I met through the workshop,
Yeah.
and other people had been through there. I could probably list. I don't want to list it because I'll leave someone out, but there were a lot of authors I really admired who got their start with West Virginia. And I sent it, I think, 3 places at once. And I heard back from Abby Freeland, who was acquiring fiction at the time.
Right.
She got back to me 2 days after I sent it.
Oh, wow. That's fantastic.
It was really cool. Well, she asked for the full. She didn't take it. And then a week later, she said she wanted to publish it. And after all that time, it went so fast that it was sort of took my breath a little bit. But I sat down with her and we talked. We actually went I went up to Cincinnati to the Appalachian Studies Association conference to sit down face to face with her, to see if that's what we wanted to do, because she got back to me so fast that the other publishers didn't even have time to look at it. And the question was, do you want to go with this? And I liked West Virginia University Press and a bird in the hand, as they say. And so she got me to agree to go, and I haven't regretted it.
Right. That's fantastic. Of course, it came out during the pandemic in 2020. And
Just in time.
I had 2 books that came out in 2020 as well. And I know how they just sort of sat for a while. So how did you get out and promote it right away, or did you?
So it was scheduled to be released March 1st. It's a long story. There was an issue with Amazon. Amazon says it came out January 15th, which wasn't actually the publication date, and it was a stock issue. But it was due to come out March 1st. I really thought, okay, it's coming out with the university press. I need to hustle around, pardon me invoking the title, but I really need to hustle. And because it's going to be more probably, some degree of word of mouth here. And I had 27 appearances in 8 states lined up. And in conjunction with the book, my friends at Country Boy Brewing here in Central Kentucky brewed Hillbilly Hustle Lager. And in late February, we did events at both of their locations with the book, which is, I don't know if that's a first, probably not. And I always make sure to give credit. That is also a David Joy thing. He had his original book, Where All Light Tends to Go. He had a beer, and that was where I got that idea from. So I didn't originate that idea. But anyway, we did 2 events at the brewery on the same day. And then actually Silas House, we went to Joseph Beth Booksellers in Lexington and had an event. And then we had the launch party at Apollo set. We got all those done before the pandemic.
Wow.
And everything else was canceled. I was supposed to appear with Leah Hampton, Annette Clapsaddle, and Savannah Sipple at the Appalachian Studies Association conference the very next week. And then I had another event in Irvine, Kentucky. And all week I held my fingers and thought, please, 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 let me get through this weekend. Let me get through this weekend. And we wound up everything canceled out. And that was it. So we went to Zoom, and we did Zoom, and we did the best we could. And Zoom was great. At least gave us something, because otherwise you just sit home and cry. Yes. And it's not the same as being in person. No. It's not. You don't sell as many books, but we did the best we could. And, the Merriam-Webster pleasant surprise, they named it one of the 17 recommended pandemic reads.
Wow.
I didn't find out for a while after they named it that. I hadn't even seen it. And then it turned up. Someone tagged me in a post and said, have you seen this? And that was neat. And so that gave it a little boost and things like that. But as you know, it was discouraging, especially you wait that long to publish, and then that's what happens. But I will say, much worse things happen to people during the pandemic. That's what I always tell myself, is if that's the worst thing that happened to me, then I was very lucky.
If you'll give me a thumbnail synopsis of the story and its main characters, particularly Knox.
So Knox Thompson is the proprietor of Porthos Pizza on South 2nd Street in Richmond, Kentucky. Well, our pizza place that we own is called Apollo Pizza, and it's on South 2nd Street in Richmond, Kentucky. So it's a pretty thinly veiled version of Apollo Pizza. And before we took over Apollo Pizza in 2012, it was sort of an open secret that you could buy your pot at Apollo Pizza. And I worked in the court system. I was a defense attorney way back when. I started as a prosecutor, didn't do that for very long, became a defense attorney. The police would talk about it in court. Everyone knew that they were selling pot at Apollo, and they even had, there was a story where a guy had a child support summons or something, and they went to try and serve him. The police did, and I think it was a warrant. And they didn't know, but back then Apollo didn't have a back door. We put a back door on it because it was crazy. You had this restaurant with no back door. But anyway, they sent an officer around back in case it was an employee they were after. They thought he might run out the back when they came in to serve this child support warrant. And he hears the officer heard thumping on the ground, this just very light thump, and he couldn't figure out what it was. And then something caught his eye, and he looked up. Someone had turned off the motor of the walk-in cooler, and they were taking bags of pot and pushing them out the back through the fan system to try and get rid of them, because the police came and they thought they were there to bust the operation, and they didn't care. So the officer collects all these baggies and comes back around. They've got this guy collared at this point, and they're taking him. He's like, "What do we want to do with all this pot?" And he said, "Let's just get rid of it." And they just threw it away. They didn't even ask anyone what happened. So I thought that's an interesting idea for a novel. And Knox is not a real person. He's certainly not me. He's not anyone I know. He was someone that I made up, and that was the cool thing about that class. It was like you're creating someone from whole cloth.
Mm-hmm.
And there used to be two protagonists, and it's a long story, and it was very last minute in the revision process. But a writing well, he's on the cover, Benjamin Percy.
Mm-hmm.
I took a class with him, and a novel class. And he said, I love your book, but I like one of the protagonists a lot better than the other. And you might be better off just having the whole book be about him. Mm. And so there was a main character called Casey who does not exist, except some of his scenes. He is now a female character named Tori.
Right.
I salvaged a lot of the scenes, and there's a character named Rob who used to be a female character. And I flipped them in a lot of scenes, but very late in the process, with about 40 days to go before my final draft was due, I called Abby and I told her what Ben said. And she said, I'm not sure he's wrong. Can you do it? And I rewrote it. It was like a 90,000 word manuscript, which was maybe too long for the story. Anyway, I cut it to 50. And I wrote it back out to a shade over 70. I can't remember where we wound up, like 72. And I completely got rid of one of the main characters and just made it all about Knox Thompson.
Huh.
Tell
us what Knox gets into.
So Knox, this is another stolen from real life thing, is I play poker. I love to play poker. There's not as many games as there used to be, but I used to, I played in the World Series of Poker back in 2007, and I was very into poker. And there were a lot of backroom games in and around Madison County and other counties, and I used to go to those. Well, there was a game in Jackson County. Someone told me to go play in that game, and I was interested, and I was asking questions and finding out where to go. And it was over the pool hall, I was told, in Jackson County. And as I was leaving, a fellow I knew, a local guy, he's actually a chiropractor that I used to play poker with, grabbed me and said, do not go to that game. You're either going to get robbed or you're going to get hustled, but don't go to that poker game. There's nothing good is going to happen for you there. And it's funny, I actually I told that story somewhere, and two people who played in that pool hall one time said that they actually got robbed at the pool hall when they won at pool. So I think there was some truth to that. It was a rough place. I sent Knox Thompson there. So this opens with Knox Thompson going to this poker game in Jackson County that I didn't go to myself. And I just sort of imagined what would happen if it went bad. And this is all fiction. This is where I started making things up. But it's run by a cannabis cultivator named Burl Spoon, who is a kingpin there, and Knox doesn't know it, and he wins at the game, and he finds out he's not going to leave with his winnings, but he is offered the deal of, if you want to trade in your winnings for a pound of marijuana, people aren't calling it marijuana anymore. There's some question that you're not supposed to call it that anymore. So I've been trying to shift it to cannabis. I've been doing this so long though that it's hard to change it. But anyway, so if you want to, I'll just say pot. He basically gets roped into buying a pound of pot, and Burl says, you've got a pizza shop. What better place to deal pot than out of a pizza shop? And that's where the old history of Apollo ties in with the poker game at the above in the book. It's on arcade, but anyway, and my love of poker, I tied all those together to get the wheels turning. And it was Mark Powell. I had a lot of help here. Mark Powell was one of my teachers, and I took a novel class with him, and he said, your best scene is the poker game. You should open with it. That used to be 60 pages deep. It used to be 60 pages of this other guy, Casey, who's gone now, before I got to the poker game. And Mark said, don't wait, lead with the poker game. So starts
what do they call that? In media res, right in the middle of the story.
Yeah. Yep.
So once this came out, were there people who still thought there might be, based in realities because Porthos had at some point sold pot?
Not so much. I think people understand. I'm an attorney. I would be really taking a lot of chances with my license if we did that. I can tell you we've not sold cannabis there since 2012. I can't speak to before that. I can't even speak to who was behind it. I don't even know who was involved in it when it was running. It could have been a rogue delivery driver. I don't know, but just know there was an issue. It was actually Jason Howard. We were talking about Jason earlier. He said, if you had a book tour everywhere you went, some people would have tried to smoke pot with you because they would have thought you were really into it. That's not really my thing. I did a lot of research about it. In fact, one of my former managers at Apollo, who was a nice guy named Carl, he gave me something called the Weedopedia, and it was a reference book about pot, and I used that. There's a lot of websites out there. I remember there's one called Leafy, and there's a lot of different websites where you can learn about it. The strains have different names, and I used all real strains. At one point, I had a strain called Gorilla Glue included. It was a real thing, and I saw it. When I worked with Benjamin Percy, I was out in Portland, Oregon, and it's legal out there. And I went into one of the dispensaries just to kind of check things out, and they had Gorilla Glue, and I had it in the book. And then I researched and realized that Gorilla Glue didn't come around until later in time than the time frame of the book. So I had to find a new strain of pot, and I wound up using one called Girl Scout cookies, which I think is wonderful. Either one of them would have been great, but I was kind of happy after it all ended because I thought Girl Scout cookies was a pretty great name.
That's pretty funny. Yeah, right.
Yeah, I had a good time with that.
Who's your favorite character in the novel?
Man, I love them all. I think, don't we all do that? Don't we all fall in love with all our own characters? I mean, I hate to say authors are inward looking, but we are. I like Knox. I'm really fond of Knox. A lot of people really like Burl Spoon, the villain, the antagonist. And believe it or not, so many people like Burl Spoon. I've written a follow-up, and it's called Spoon, and it's about Burl
Oh,
Spoon and his family.
wow.
And that one, and by the way, I finally found my agent. I got an agent for that book, so we're gonna try and get that out in the world. But after 24 years of looking, I signed with an agent for Spoon, so we're gonna try and get Spoon out. A lot of people like Darla. I like
Yeah.
Darla, who
Yeah.
is Burl's essentially girlfriend, and I don't want to give anything away by talking about her too much. But she's a tattoo artist who comes in from Pittsburgh and sets up shop in Richmond, and to say Knox is smitten with her is an understatement. He is very
Yeah, I
taken.
like Darla. I like Darla. Okay,
Yeah.
I want to read you this quote that your friend Benjamin Percy wrote and then ask you how you feel about it. Wesley Browne writes like the smart talking, card shuffling, bullet dodging, bourbon soaked love child of Ron Rash, Leonard, Elmore Leonard, and the Coen brothers. Do you take that as a compliment?
Yeah, a big one. I love that quote. There's a reason it's on the cover. I mean, I should say I got a lot of nice blurbs, and people were very kind to give me a lot of really nice blurbs. That one I really appreciate because I came to Kentucky in 1996 to go to law school. But I originally grew up near where Elmore Leonard was from, and I grew up on Elmore Leonard.
Oh, wow.
I never met him. My mom did. She went to signings, and I actually have a copy of his book, Out of Sight. And it says, Wesley, good luck with your novel, Elmore Leonard.
Oh, that's
And
great.
yeah, and so that was, and Ben didn't know that. He just knew that he felt like there were some similarities between Elmore Leonard. I've actually had strangers email me who read this and went on my website and got my email address and who have compared it somewhat to Elmore Leonard. I take that as a huge compliment. I love it.
Right.
I love the Coen brothers work. I love Ron Rash. Ron Rash I've been fortunate enough to get to know Ron Rash, and he's a very kind and incredibly talented guy. I love his work. So I would take all of those.
Okay. All right. And Silas says, sheds light on a whole new kind of Appalachia that's never been seen before. Do you agree with that?
I hope it's true. I like the idea that it's true. We did that event at Joseph Book, Beth, that we talked about earlier, and it was interesting. We started talking about who gets to write about Appalachia. And Silas told me, Silas was an old writing teacher of mine, but he said, because you weren't native Kentucky, I'm going to admit that I was very skeptical going into your book. Not that I thought it would be bad, but I'm just reading it closely. And he said, and I appreciate it. He said, because it was truthful, but it was also honest, and it wasn't condescending to Appalachia. And that really meant the world to me.
Sure.
But what we talked about is there are 3 types of books about Appalachia written by 3 different types of people. Silas is an Appalachian, born and bred, has stayed here, and has this very vivid and clear writing about Appalachia. I love it. I've read everything he does. I love it. Then you have folks who are from here, who move away, live in a different part of the world, and when they come back, they see their home in a different way. And I think they write about it in a little bit different way. They're not really an outsider coming in, but they see it with fresh eyes. I've read books by folks like that are amazing. I've lived in Kentucky more than half my life. My wife is from Lawrence County, Kentucky, right on the West Virginia line. My friends are all, highly Kentucky and Appalachian in general. But I wasn't raised here. So I come in with the perspective as somewhat of an outsider who's gotten really familiar with the area. And I think have been immersed enough that I can write about it. But my perspective on it and the things that I see and pick out are also going to be a little bit different. And I don't think any one of us can write the same type of book, but I think we can all write books that are true. And I think we can all write books that are accurate to what Appalachia is. And I kind of feel like you need all of those perspectives to really get a clear, to get a clear canon of the place.
So, so now you're about to launch, hopefully, a semi-sequel, I guess, about your evil guy. shall we call him. So that should be very interesting. Is that going to be also a different slice of life of Appalachia?
I think so. I was really careful to write it as a standalone so that if you hadn't read Hillbilly Hustle, you can read this as something fresh. The culture, and it's actually mentioned in Hillbilly Hustle how culturally you can go 30, 40 miles in Appalachia and everything changes. Richmond, I wouldn't say is completely urban, but Richmond's more urban than a lot of places in Appalachia, and Richmond is so different than McKee and Jackson County. And I will admit, I've had some people say, well, I was pretty faithful to exactly how Richmond was, but I wasn't as on the money with how I did things in Jackson County. And it was because I wanted to sort of leave the palette open because I knew I wanted to look at what the possibilities were there.
Right.
This one is based more fully in Jackson County. But it's interesting too, though, because it ends up, it takes place also in Louisville and other places. So I kind of like showing these characters in their home setting and then moving them out of their home setting and see what happens when they go elsewhere. And part of what Silas was talking about too, backing up a little bit, is like Knox is kind of a nerd, and he's like a comic book nerd, and he's a pop culture nerd. And he told me that was a little bit what he meant about a different kind of Appalachians. He said, everyone thinks everyone in Appalachia's, making blackberry pies and biscuits and quilting, and Appalachia is very different than that. I mean, Huntington is very different than that, as we both know. So it's interesting. I hadn't really put it together, but Knox is probably more sort of the urban Appalachian and a little bit, sort of that counterculture. And he's not, his parents are from Appalachia, but he grew up in Frankfort. So Frankfort's not technically Appalachia. So there's all these sort of lines that I don't think most people obsess about what is and isn't Appalachia as much as people in Appalachia do.
Right, probably right. This has been wonderful to talk to you, and I'm afraid we're out of time. But thank you so much for writing Hillbilly Hustle and for getting it out there in the world for us to all read. It's wonderful, and I'm thrilled that you're going to move on and do another one. I'm your host, Carter Seaton, and thanks again to Wesley. Bye-bye.
Connect with Chapters through email. Write to lp4@zoominternet.net. Chapters has a Facebook page at Armstrong Chapters. Like, subscribe, share, and comment. All Chapters episodes are available on YouTube. Visit the Armstrong Neighborhood channel on YouTube and look for a playlist of all the Chapters programs.